All right. Does it all look clear there on your end?
Beautiful.
All right. So I'm Michelle Batten. I'm with Idaho Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health. And as of tomorrow, I'm on their staff. So my work in the past has been in the state working with foster and adoptive families. I'll continue working with families outside of the state too, but bringing this into the Federation and working with them and bringing some of this information there. So my work with trust-based relational intervention started probably about 9 years ago. I was attending a church where there was 2,000 people and 30 foster and adoptive families. And so a large population. And I looked around and went, oh my, because I had grown up in a home where there were foster children and my sister was adopted. If you read the little blip that Roger sent out, my sister came to us at 11 months of age. She had visitation till she was 3, and this was in the 70s, so things lasted longer. And she was adopted at age 5. My parents were told that love, a good education, and a church community would all be enough to seal the gaps, make sure things were filled in, and that wasn't enough for my sister. And when her behaviors became extreme and it made no sense to me, and it surely couldn't have been the early first 11 months, but it was. And what I learned later, when fast forwarding back to that time period working with friends, is I was introduced to trust-based relational intervention. I had studied child development, and for short, we call it TBRI, made sense to me because it was full of hope and healing, and it was developmental model, and that fit with who I was, who I am, and how I work with people. So I dove in, went with a adoptive parent to a conference to learn about TBRI, and brought that home and started building a ministry, and then at this church, and served families, and began to have foster families who attended that support group and learning about TBRI. It was a children's program paralleled to an adult program. And from there, moved, sure enough, 5 years into that, families were having a lot going on and needed to pull away who were in that community. So I moved that into a business. So I've been serving families in Idaho for the last 5 years under my own business, which is Hopeful Connections Parenting. But now we'll be serving families through Idaho Federation. So jump in about what TBRI is. TBRI is Trust-Based Relational Intervention. Sorry, I'm having trouble moving my slides on this webinar. Look at that. I'll keep talking to you, but I can't seem to move my slides. Roger, any pieces or uh-oh. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing and reshare and see what happens here, because it looks like PowerPoint just decided not to work. So I'm good at talking off the top of my head. I know what I'll do right now. I will share my video here with you guys about what TBRI is. And that's a good place to start.
TBRI,
Can you see that,
Trust-Based
Yep, looks great.
has at its core building a trusting relationship. It has 3 sets of principles, and they look at the child as a whole. When you think about development, the baby cries and I say, yes, I will comfort you. And so this child learns that they have a voice. They learn trust, which is the lesson of the first year of life. I can trust. There are so many children from hard places. And for those children, their capacity to trust has been fiercely damaged. The brain chemistry of a child who cries and no one comes is dramatically altered. The child with a history of trauma or loss or abuse has no hope of healing without a nurturing relationship. In every way that I make time and space, that I give touch, eye contact, and I give words, I am going to empower this child to go back to the beginning of what he or she should have experienced in the arms of a loving parent that said, when you cry, I will come. The phenomenal thing about a trust-based intervention is, as we connect to this child, as we build safety, we actually change the brain chemistry. We change the wiring of the brain. This is really the heart and soul of all that we are and all that we do. Do I look into the child's eyes? Do I touch their arm when I talk to them? When they talk to me, do I stop what I'm doing and talk to them? This is the essence of mindfulness. The excitatory chemicals about I'm afraid, I'm hungry, I'm cold, those are balanced when the caregiver comes and gives warmth. All regulation occurs first with an external regulator. So in the beginning, I regulate all. They're cold, I bring warmth. They're crying, I bring myself. And out of my regulation, their brain develops capacity for self-regulation. If this child didn't have this experience, that child doesn't feel safe. This chemistry can be altered, first by knowing they're safe, second by nutrient-rich foods, third by my environmental regulation of that child's emotion, and fourth by appropriate exercise. So we can balance brain chemistry by creating a holistic environment. We clearly have to deal with behavior. Correcting means showing a child the right behavior, praising him when he gets it, and showing it to him until he can get it right, and showing him with no fear and no shame, so that he builds success, not a greater sense of failure. So the message of hope for our families is that we can help our children to dramatic levels of healing. We simply have to be devoted to it and be willing to invest what it's going to take.
All right. I've got to switch applications here. I got my PowerPoint back up. So hopefully it shares well. So what attracted me to TBRI was just that it was so hopeful, and that there's that developmental model. It's holistic. I appreciate that we're looking at the whole child and all the different, what I teach parents is puzzle pieces that are feeding into the chaos they're living with. The parents I work with are typically kids who are on the edge of ending up in residential care, that they've spent time in foster care for a while. They had a chaotic beginning, or children who have been adopted, and those families find their way to me because they're also living with extreme behaviors. So TBRI is also evidence-based. I love that about it. I can bring it into schools. I can bring it into residential facilities, into homes, and provide a way for parents to understand the entire child. And again, it's developmental, responsive to trauma. And a key component is it's attachment-based, and we'll talk about that as now it's working, as we move into that. So TBRI has been used in different settings because of developmental evidence-based practice. It's in homes, residential. I've been able to talk to Boise, CUNA, school district, or schools, not districts, but schools. I've been able to go out to the Patriot Center, places like that, and introduce them to ideas of trauma responsive and redirecting from just straight behavioral modification models. And so that's always exciting. A lot of the beginning TBRI research was with preschool and young school age kids. And they do now have some resources that are available for teenagers. What I like, though, is when I work with a family, we can talk about how trauma-aged kids typically are about half their age emotionally. So when I'm working with a 16-year-old, we can meet them at that developmental age of emotional age of 8. And so if we can look at things developmentally, that for me, that's really helpful. So here's the principles of TBRI. What I call the connecting, or TCU calls the connecting principles, the empowering principles, and then the correcting principles. Oh, I forgot to say something at the beginning. That little badge at the top just means that I went and became a TBRI educator, and got the training down at Texas Christian University to learn more and be able to do their presentation. So that connecting principle is really the foundation of that, is about attachment. And so we'll talk about mindful strategies, which is understanding our own story and our interactions with our kids and how that plays out. Engagement strategies, which is based on attachment theory. Empowering principles, which have to do with, I talk to parents, the outside and then the inside of the child, what the triggers are and what's going on for the whole child that plays into their behavior. And then correcting principles. This is hard. This is hard when a kid punches you in the face, and how do you correct them? What do you do? And how do we not escalate the child? And how does the parent remain in the here and now and present in correction and what's appropriate? Because rarely are parents taught what's appropriate for that extreme behavior. And the foundation of this is about felt safety. Something I use in my to teach parents as I talk about the responses of someone if they run into a bear in the woods. And maybe we could do this actually in the chat. Can you see the chat, Roger, or would I be able to see that? Your microphone is on.
Roger, we can't hear you.
Yeah, there's a little bit of there's a little shape of a like a message in a comic strip. And if you click on that, I mean, I'm looking at the chats. If you want me to read them, I can do that for you.
Well, I can see the screen now. I moved it off the presentation. All right. So if you run into a bear in the woods, pretend with me. Think about you can put this in the chat. What are your responses? Like, what does both what your body does, what your emotions do, those types of things. What are a bear response? This is an exercise I often do with parents. You can put it in the chat. Freeze, heart races, fight or flight. That would be, for some people, it's just, what is one of those, fight or flight? You would fight. You're braver than me. Cry, I agree, which is freeze. Everything slows down. Isn't that true? That happens for a lot of people. Maybe you'd play dead. That's true. So there's all these responses that just might happen. I can't get my chat to go away. That just might happen. But what's important is that those responses, those heart racing, eyes dilating, sweaty palms, those things happen on the playground. Right? Like kids run around and their heart starts racing and they're sweaty, and then they come in from recess. And if a child hasn't learned that feeling isn't about the predator, then that they can't escape that. And we're asking them to sit in their chair and do math. So those kinds of things, or a parent just sends them outside to play before dinner and then asks them to eat the worst vegetable in the world, right? And then they have violence at their dinner table. So it's important for parents, like as we explore these things, to talk about this idea of felt safety. All right, so one of our first principles is connecting, and that's the foundation. And we look at mindful strategies, and the first piece of that is the connecting principle of looking at my own past and how that plays. I'll give you an example. For some reason, for me, one of the hardest things to deal with is, this is for my own kids. I actually can take this from other people's kids, but disrespect. Like when my kids, my heart will start racing and that fight comes up in me, and I have to be present and fully aware of that as they were teenagers, because my own past, for whatever reason, I haven't even figured that one out, but for whatever reason, that's just a trigger for me. But being aware of that, of why am I actually responding to this and what's going on, and being mindful of that, is this piece of the beginning of connecting. Because if we can stay fully present and in the here and now and recognize that's not the real issue, is the disrespect, or being able to correct the disrespect if it is, and being able to stay in the present rather than reacting either about the kid's history of disrespecting every day or my own history, that's that first piece. The other connecting principle is engagement strategies. So when I talk about engagement and connecting, this is where a big piece of that attachment comes in. So the attachment cycle, and I think this is so interesting because of the chemistry and the brain and the trajectory of relationships we set our children on in the earliest years. If we don't do fierce work about this cycle and work with our own history, that this process is the rhythm of relationships are set up in this early attachment cycle. So a baby, let's look at that middle, distress and comfort. A baby is distressed. They need their diaper changed. They need to be fed. There's a bubble in their stomach, whatever that distress is. A caregiver comes and comforts them and provides the calming factor to teach them what that rhythm feels like to get dysregulated and then be regulated. And when that happens, when they're distressed, that sympathetic nervous system is triggered. The parent calms them and the parasympathetic nervous system comes into play. As well, those excited neurotransmitters are then calmed by the inhibitory neurotransmitters. So this cycle is done, if you've had children, many times a day. With that newborn to 3-year-old that they're distressed and we're calming them, and that's a dance that we do. So as I teach parents this dance of attachment, and I teach them about what it looks like to calm our children, I often talk to them about their 8-year-old or however old their child is, and we look back at this cycle of what does a baby need in order to be comforted? How can I meet my child's needs, even at 8, that helps them begin to get this pattern of attachment? Because this pattern is the foundation for trust and self-worth and self-efficacy, giving voice to my needs and being able to say what I need, to be able to regulate, and really the foundation of mental health. Because the trajectory of mental illness for the kids I work with is at 2 or 3, we label behavioral dysregulation. Let's just use the foster system. By 4 to 6, those kids are starting to put on meds for ADHD. 8 to 10, we see anxiety. If it doesn't show up by middle school, where often the kids I work with are already labeled bipolar. It's big. And so this trajectory of attachment and calming and getting the brain calmed. The original researcher, Dr. Purvis, would say that their brains are on fire with these neurochemicals, and it's like living in that constant, there's a bear in the room, and those the response to the world is as if there's always a bear and they never get to leave the presence of that bear. And so teaching the parents to help them recognize and understand that and meet needs in new ways that provide for this attachment cycle is really important. So we go back to what does a baby need? And if you've ever looked at an infant and a young infant even, and just stuck out your tongue and they mimic you, if you've seen that happen, those are mirror neurons in their brain firing as they match with you. And so behavior matching is a bit of a piece of the attachment cycle I can help parents start to tie in. Nurturing touch, something we give to infants all the time that is often a calming piece to children. We navigate that carefully for children who have come from abuse. Eye contact and valuing someone, telling them they're precious, is through warm eyes, is what we call that, just that caring eye contact. Children from hard places often have not had the experience of being looked at their eyes, and they will avoid eye contact. So just quick glances at first might be all we get. Voice quality of keeping playful cadence, and that last thing of playful engagement ties into that. This idea of play, disarming fear, is a big piece of TBRI. So with these connecting principles, we're looking at my own story and then how I can meet this attachment need in order to regain that ground in the beginning of what should have happened with attachment. The other piece, another principle, so we've got connection, then we have empowering principles. These are physiological and ecological. So we're looking at, I explained to parents, the outside and the inside, the internal state and what's going on the outside in order to help a child regulate. So, physiological. These are simple things like what we do for little ones. Hydration, that really helps brain chemistry. Blood sugar, every few hours, I suggest that parents have a protein snack for their child. A lot of kids I work with have not been, food has been withheld, either because they're come from a place where there is no food and it couldn't be provided, or it was withheld from them. And so a lot of the kids I work with are food hoarders. So they'll sneak, and this was actually a piece of my sister's story that made my mom bonkers of why she needed to have so many food wrappers hidden under her mattress and in her closet and in her other random places. But we teach kids, parents now, that they are able to have a little snack basket or maybe a fanny pack where kids keep a snack. And it is amazing because that snack, they will keep it as a treasured item oftentimes and not even eat it, but just to know that there is food available helps a child feel safe. Again, it's telling them there's no bear in the room. I'm going to feed you. And then the third puzzle piece with physiological strategies is looking at a kid's sensory needs. And so oftentimes this involves an OT and figuring out what sensory input a child needs. But parents can also be great detectives at, oh, that's interesting, Roger. Participant just said that they had family members who they have seen some of these things in. So sensory activity every few hours is a really useful way. Now that might be a parent being a detective and finding out, does the trampoline calm my child, or does that put them into a state of acting like there's a bear in the room? And I talked to a parent recently this weekend. They were saying that their kid jumping on the trampoline and laughing and having fun and came over and socked them in the face. Probably we need to cut trampoline time because that might be overstimulating to a point that they might need some regulation in there someplace. But those kind of things are really important, just to constantly be a detective. And when you're being punched in the face because it's on the trampoline, and then because they're not, then you're being hit and pinched because you didn't get enough food, and then you've got a kid who's behaving in school and getting kicked out of the school because they have to do math, is what the teacher says. Like, it's hard to be a detective and understand when you just think the trampoline would give everyone a break, right? So it's really tough on these parents to figure out what is it that they need. And so we had the principles of physiological, those outside pieces that a parent can look at. We also have ecological strategies of different pieces we can add to the day. So we put scaffolding, like helping a child build up developmentally to certain skills and thinking of that. We also have daily rituals. So if you think about a parent putting an infant to bed, there's a lot of either they may read books, they may rock, they may do their bath first, or when they wake up, we have a breakfast and then we get ready to go off to work and go to daycare. And this is what we do before daycare. And so there's a lot of rituals built in the day. Even children who are 8, 10, I would even say 16, sometimes they need that much structure in their days in order to have the external regulation. We say often that when we increase that structure, we match that with increased nurture to find a balance to our parenting that provides healing. And the other piece that I talk a lot about is transitions. So those are typical, but normal is not the right word, typical parenting pieces that we may try to incorporate in healthy parenting, but they're difficult to incorporate when your daily rituals are you put your shoes on before you head to the car, but the child's already raging before they've gotten to their shoes. So trying to solve problems with parents about how do we incorporate these things that actually meet the needs of the child. Oh, look, I have 2 of the same slides. Correcting principles. These are both proactive and responsive. Proactive correcting principles have to do with teaching children beforehand about how we correct them. So I'll get to this part in a minute, but one of the scripts we use is, can I have a redo? But I wouldn't, in the heat of the moment and in a child having behaviors I don't want, I wouldn't correct them in that way without having taught before. That might be taught through play, which is the best way to teach, but that might be taught through puppets or even blocks, right? Like with a little child, I might stack blocks, and when they knock them down, practice saying, can you ask me, right? And so we're playing playful, and there's not a lot of high stakes at this point for knocking the blocks down and playing and teaching at that point. On the other hand, there might be higher stakes when they're playing blocks with their 4-year-old brother, and it's not just knocking it down, it's throwing it or whatever that looks like. So proactive strategies are about teaching beforehand. And then there's responsive strategies, and that's how we engage a child who's escalating in a developmentally appropriate way, in a way that gives the child the increased structure and increased nurture as their behavior is escalating. So this is, this slide combines the poster I give to parents I work with, along with the TBRI. You can see it's not TBRI anymore with their nice purple slides. This is my own work, and that is, the piece that's theirs is this playful engagement on the first level, structured engagement on the second level, and then calming engagement on this third level, and then protective engagement. And I use this because I think it's equally important to teach children about where we're going to meet them on the mountain, because as their behavior escalates, the parents' engagement also will change. And so I also have found that parents say, I know where I am on the mountain, and so I'm better able to meet my child's needs. So let's start at the bottom part, the chill hill. Checking out the time here. Chill hill is a place of playful engagement. That's more easily correctable in 60 seconds. I can use connection strategies like holding their hands and looking at their eyes. And I can think of this as a calm time. It's easy for me to remain calm. The child isn't just completely dysregulated. To use the picture of the flipping brain that Dan Siegel uses, they're not completely flipped. They've just slightly dysregulated, and we still can engage their frontal lobe. And so this is easy words, just quickly, let's have a redo, or try that again, respect. Sometimes I'll say, are you asking or telling? I actually have found TBRI, and the model of TBRI is really helpful in thinking through relationships of all sorts, because connection and engagement, those things are all helpful. When it comes to this part, this is the part where I always tell parents, like, it's always helpful to have the basis in a relationship of like, can we try this again? Or let's start this conversation over again. It's not wise to say, let's have a redo or try that again with respect, but it's a good strategy as far as engaging relationships. So this chill hill is, we can easily dive down into that ocean and have fun, and we're back to being playful. It doesn't take much strategy for a parent, but they have to be watchful, because that doesn't mean that the kid isn't farther up that mountain than they thought, and that the child might not need higher engagement strategy. So up at Trigger Trouble Bluff, that next level, which is more structured engagement, because we're increasing structure and increasing nurture. There's either two directions we can go with this. We can go with choices, which are real choices, and when it's done, it's done. The child is able to just get back down into that ocean water and be back to playful. And choices work great, except when the child doesn't like the choice, right? Like when behavior escalates anyways. So here's an example. Would you like oatmeal, or would you like cereal, another type of cereal for breakfast? And the child answers cereal because a kiddo with trauma has the connection in the in-between parts of the right and left brain is much thicker, oftentimes in a kiddo with trauma. And so the left and right brain don't work together in the same way, and so processing speed is different. So if I give the child a choice, the only answer that comes back is whatever they heard last, because the information actually didn't go to the other side of the brain to be processed verbally. So they spit that out, and then now the cereal is across the whole kitchen because they said cereal, but that's not even what they meant. And now they have this idea that they actually wanted waffles. And these are like real examples. So what we talk to parents about is giving children voice, teaching them that the parent can share power without losing their power, that it's more this foundation of shared power. So that means that we teach, again, proactively, we teach the child to, do you want, I'm forgetting my examples already, cereal or oatmeal? And the parent said, knowing that there's this trauma brain with a little bit different of processing speed, do you want cereal or oatmeal? I'll come back to you in a minute after I get your orange juice, and then allow that processing time, come back, and the child says, no, I want waffles. And what the parent can do is teach the child to say, can I have a compromise? I want waffles. Or just respectfully, can I have waffles? Because if the waffles is no inconvenient, it's really teaching the child to have a voice that they didn't get at infancy, where they asked for a need to be met and no one fed them, no one comforted them, no one came in the night while they were crying. And so being able to, and so now they don't normally have the skills, they throw a fit or rage. And so giving them those skills and sharing that power, the give and take that we actually do really well with infants usually in healthy parenting, but we don't do so well with older children, and teaching them how to navigate a compromise and how to make negotiation happen is a fabulous way, because additionally that engages the front of the brain, and the child has to calm down anyways in order to use the front of their brain. So that idea of shared power. But yet, if that doesn't work, which is never, I'll never say that we don't end up at the top of the volcano sometimes. But the next level is we call agitation ascent. Also, I teach parents that they may have to come in at any point of this and assess, where's my child? Even at the beginning, they might be at this calming engagement place. And that is, we move to this time in, and that this is more about calming and regulating, that drawing a child closer to the parent and just saying, can I help you calm while we figure this out together? There's connection, there's calming, and again, there's that idea of giving voice to the child and allowing them to get out of that place of fight, flight, and freeze. And with families, I work with them of, what does this mean for your child? Does this mean that they need a sensory box, and that you say it's time for that sensory box, and they go and calm down and use those sensory toys? That might be Play-Doh and fidgets and a variety of other things in a box that only is for this time. And then we come back and you make the oatmeal, clean up your oatmeal that you just threw, and we talk about what your breakfast really is. Or is this a time that they need social? For teenagers, this might be a social distancing, and they may choose to move away from people in order to calm. So being a detective and responding to your child's developmental needs and their needs for calming is really important in this place. Then this last level, this protective engagement, is about safety. It's the family I talked to this week who everyone locked themselves in their room, and the teenage daughter was cornering them in the adult in the corner, and there really was a need for there really was a potential for needing police involvement or just keeping that child safe for that time. But if we can teach parents this, if we can teach them, okay, this is a different way to engage with your child that's going back and meeting some developmental needs and teaching them to have a voice, so that when they cry or have the 8-year-old or 16-year-old version of crying and needing help, that you're the one calming them and that they can come to you. It's quite a healing process. So connection, correction, and empowerment are really those 3 principles. And that was a lot of information in 40 minutes. I can do an 8-hour session on that. So those are the different pieces. What are your guys' thoughts and questions? And what are some other pieces of like what you guys have seen in the experience of classrooms and different settings as you go in and engage families? And also, I think importantly is this model isn't it's not a therapy model or a model that's here's the steps and it leaves a big space for a parent to make it their their own family culture and bring it into their home. And I know by looking at the list, some of you guys have used it in your homes and in your work settings. And so anyways, what are your experiences and questions and what's running through your head as we're talking?
So when you're talking to somebody or to working with a family where the child hasn't had any of these things until they're 8 years old, how long, or not many of these things, right? They're adopted at a later age and they've lived through a chaotic life. How long would you say? I don't know. Maybe this probably doesn't make any sense. How long? But what's the process of getting how does TBRI effectively start to reach that child who hasn't really had those things present previously?
So it's hard to say, and this is why I think it's hard to say, because but this is why, is because I think I navigate this statement carefully, but a child who's been abused has had the attention of an adult and a very unhealthy attachment, but they've been seen, though they haven't been heard, right? And that looks really different than a child who's been neglected and put in a closet and never been seen or heard. And so what that process, and then tie in, possibly sexual abuse or tie in positive, right? Like, so that journey to healing is so bumpy and long and can be intense or indifferent. I really have seen that. I mean, and sometimes you're talking parents who have mental illness and aren't able to always be present. So sometimes they are present and sometimes they're not, or maybe they've ended up in jail, right? And so children, but they may have had that significant adult in their life. Grandma was there instead, right? And when we talk about the strong curriculum, right, we talk about that one important grown-up. Here it is if that one important grown-up is, and they've learned some pattern of how to healthily relate, then that may give them the hook to hang all this on. On the other hand, I have seen this, parents try to get this in their home and they still need the level of residential, right? That they need the space for their own healing, because living with a trauma kiddo causes secondary trauma often, and that they need the space for the child to find healing so they can come back together. I think that having TBRI can help the parent to decrease that secondary trauma, because they can see the world and have compassion for that story that child has, which helps us to come alongside someone. This is true of working with adults too, right? Like, they can help us come alongside someone more easily if we can be compassionate. So that's the long answer of yes. I will say also, though, I don't have kiddos who by traditional definition would be called trauma kiddos, not foster or not adopted, but difficult pregnancy, difficult birth, early medical 30 or 40 ear infections, and that kiddo's brain, right, is going to be different and experienced a lot more excitatory neurons than maybe a child who never had those things. So I have found that but that's general population, right? I have found that for my own parenting, this is a great model, that this is developmental. So it makes sense for just general parenting, not just trauma parenting. I will say I have a funny story always, that my youngest, when I was learning about this, I decided, I'll try that TBRI time in idea, because Dr. Purvis says that they always feel like they're being sent away, and this idea of them going to calm down on their own doesn't even make sense. So this was he would have been sent to the stairs and asked to calm down and then come back and re-engage traditionally. And so I said, you know what, you're going to have to come next to me and calm down, and then we'll figure this out. He looks at me and says, I don't know why you even say that, because you don't even want me to be near you when you don't even like me when I'm like this. So it's like, oh no, they were right. That was the message I was giving you by timeout. You haven't even heard the videos yet and you're saying that. So Anyways, that was like an eye-opening thing of like, oh, this makes sense. This TBRI model makes sense for helping parents engage their kids in a way that meets their developmental needs.
Yeah, Michelle, I use this on my kids, or I started to, after taking, there's a free training right now. Did you know that?
Thank you, Taryn. There's a free training right now.
There's a free training right now.
There's a school teachers training, I believe, right now that's free. There's so many resources on YouTube that are great resources. As far as trauma-based resources, some of my favorite are all the resources I just named with TBRI, but The Body Keeps Score is an amazing resource because it helps you understand in that part of being mindful of my own story, it helps understand how our bodies change because of trauma. And it helps me to have, again, compassion on the other person I'm helping, because their body also is responding as if there's a bear in the room, and there may be no bear. But 3 days ago, there was a bear to them. So.
Right.
Michelle, this is Maureen.
Yes.
I think one of the things that I love about this, and well, about anything that we do when we're trying to teach parents to be more self-aware of what they're doing, is, and I forget whose principle it is, it might be Einstein, but that you can't solve a problem from the level of the problem, you have to get above it, you know, and that's exactly what this seems to be, to help the parents to not be enmeshed in the drama of the moment, but to, you know, kind of pull yourself above it and look at the whole child and look at the whole picture. The other thing that you said, and I don't know if I wrote it down right, was that kids who have experienced trauma may be half their age emotionally. I'd like you to talk a little more about that. One of the things that has come up several times in parenting classes that I've done, when we do an emotional timeline, some of the parents will pick out and say, oh, that's the age when I was abused, and they were kind of stuck there. Even, I mean, it might be half their age, it might be a third of their age, you know, so you get stuck at the time of trauma, I think. So if you could talk about that.
I think that that's true. I think that we can look at parents and be compassionate for that problem, right? That a parent who doesn't have the emotional age past the teenager years is not going to be able to parent any more than that emotional age. And so coming as we mentor that parent, right, who was a teen mom, as we mentor them and recognize, oh my goodness, I can have compassion about where you are and help grow. Because I always tell parents, like, the best we can give our kids is to be willing to be on a journey of growth, to be willing to say, I made a mistake, or I was coming from this point and I'm willing to see my part in that and model that to them so that they can do that. Right. And we can't always do that successfully. Dr. Purvis would say that this was encouraging to me, that if we can do it 30% right, 30% mess up, and just 30% rupture and repair, that we're doing okay. I'm like, okay, I can aim for 30% right. So anyway, so that emotional age is so important as we meet kids, but I think it's really important when we're taking mentorship positions with families and parents to be able to say, oh, where is this person emotionally, and how can I bring them along?
Well, just a quick story. I used to work with teen moms, and one summer we decided to put together these little fun baskets, and we got a bunch of junky little, you know, coloring books and sidewalk chalk and crayons and stuff, with the idea that the teen moms would play with their children with this. And some of them said, oh no, I'm not sharing this. This is mine.
Exactly.
Like, okay.
But those are the puzzle pieces that, like, you know, you mentioned about coming up at this high level, Maureen, about helping parents see at this high level. Sometimes what a parent also needs is, while we teach at this high level, the practical brainstorming. And this is where my coaching piece comes in, of how do I apply this? So what if you're telling me to look at my own story? What does that even mean? Or, okay, so I'll meet them at the level of the, you know, let's have a redo. but what is that? When do I use that? Or what do I say? And then, so going through those difficult behaviors, like the trampoline and punching him in the face. Okay, so when did that happen? How did that happen? You know, even how long was he on the trampoline? What did he do before that? Did he eat? Like brainstorming those things and breaking that puzzle apart to say, oh, he hadn't eaten breakfast, you know, or whatever that was.
Just to follow up on what you're saying, Michelle, because I just did the training not that long ago. She talked about the importance of the why. I actually really like this. Potentially, it works really great for parents of any child, from a hard place or not. And I think it would work really well on teachers, because she's talking about the importance of the why. Like you're talking about why is the child acting that way, but also why are you responding that way? So I think it's something that would be helpful to teachers to, you know, it's kind of that trauma-informed model, like where you think about, you know, your own history, and you kind of have to build your own resilience as a teacher, so that you can work with those children, but like respecting both sides of it.
Yes, yes. And that's actually, Maureen, I thought of that, this whole piece as you talked about teachers going back to school and the trauma of that, right? And that they're having to bring back their own trauma into the classroom of like what I'm laying down in order to teach and the risk I'm taking. And if they're escalated, then what does that do to the typical escalated, and then even to the atypical escalated, right? Like, and how that just amps up the whole community in that. And so what can we give to teachers that would help them, that we can't take away the safety or not safety of this issue, right? So what can we give to teachers to help them calm their insides, to be able to self-regulate and be reflective enough to be present in their teaching day, really?
I'm very much interested in that issue, because, and I'm going to be talking actually to somebody with the State Department of Ed tomorrow morning to have a conversation, because we're going to see what it is that they feel like teachers are going to need, because this is not unreal. This is real, right? This is going to be stuff. And I'm hoping that, you know, some of our team, you know, might be, you know, part of that solution, you know, to help, you know, work with teachers, or, you know, bring stuff into the preschool, the start of school, preschool.
Well, and it's interesting, because even if we can come across as like we believe that we're being present, it's the teeny tiny muscles in our face that the trauma person reads, that they react from, that we cannot control, right? That we can't, so we actually have to be regulated in order to be present for the other person. So it's not just faking our way through.
I was going to say that when you were talking about the compassionate basis, from what I get from TBRI, is that you're first disarming that fear, and then you're connecting, and then you're correcting, right?
Yeah.
So that in itself is regulating you as a parent or as a teacher to some extent, right? Because you're looking at it from a different mindset. But I love that. And I love the fact that it eventually, it's not temporary. As you said, it's rewiring the brains, right? They're rewiring that connection piece. So, yeah. I never thought it was regulating.
I think what we're asking, you know, you were talking about the bear. What we're asking the teachers and the students to do is to go into a room and learn and engage with each other while the bear is in the room. The bear is going to be there. Somebody in that room is going to have the COVID. I mean, it's statistically it would be impossible to think that there's not going to be anybody in these schools that don't have it. So,
but what's tricky is only half the people might believe that there's a bear in the room. So not everyone is still going to see that, right? So some kids will come thinking they're safe and being told they're safe and having learned that they're safe. And some teachers will believe that also, right? And so then that only amps it up and makes it more chaotic, because only half the population sees the bear.
Yeah.
And only half the population is responding to the bear. So
I couldn't learn with the bear in the room. Leave the room.
Kid can. Yeah.
I have an option. So
We've experienced TBRI both as a parent, or I have both as a parent of kids who have gone through trauma, and then Michelle's like walked us through, Michelle's walked us through using this in our own home with my biological daughter, and I'm a parent educator with parents as teachers, and it's, I think my favorite concept that I carry with me is that concept of connecting, and I feel like that's what regulates me, because if I'm not focused on connecting, then I'm just focused on not being triggered. And so if I fill up my mind with like yeses and memories of the moments where I've been able to connect with my kids, or just focusing on the calm waters, then I'm not always, or like the calm walk through the woods, then I'm not always afraid of the bear. But if I can remember like 99% of my environment does not have a bear in it. And I was talking about that with a parent the other day, because she's like, I feel like I'm just afraid of the behavior. I'm just constantly on edge. And so we talked about easy things to do. And yeah, that felt helpful to me.
That's cool.
I like that.
That's cool.
Anything else? Thoughts or questions or challenges, or how this might fit in your own work?